Come on and go with me. Come on over to my place. Come on and roll with me. Mm. Hey, shalom, shalom, everybody. How y'all doing? Welcome back to the next session of Reading with SHILO, man. We are going into chapter 3 of On the Real Side by Mr. Mel Watkins. Mr. Mel Watkins. We are starting chapter 3, section 1 by Mr. Mel Watkins, called Black Minstrelsy to Vaudeville. Black Minstrelsy to Vaudeville. Black on black. Coming for section 1, man. I should have did this earlier, but it was raining, pouring, my internet was out. So I couldn't get to you earlier, but we good now. We dry. On the real side, the history of African American comedy from slavery to Chris Rock. And so far, we're moving along, baby, one page at a time, one section at a time, one chapter at a time, line upon line, till we get to the end. We're going to try to get it in. Yeah, man. We're moving along slowly but surely, one section at a time. You know, if I get to a point to where, I'm really trying to do it one section at a time because the book is so daunting to me. It's such a big book, man. Look at all that we got left to read. Look at all that. But look at all this we didn't read. Oh, look at all that. Oh man. We enough. A little bit at a time, you know. Shalom, shalom. How you doing? Welcome. Come on in so we can begin. Tell your people and you can. Make sure they got friends. Nah. Yeah, but we are ready. Spiritual conversation. We are ready to get into chapter 3. We're starting chapter 3 today of On the Real Side. Chapter 3, section 1, Black Minstrelsy to Vaudeville, Black on Black. Chapter 3, section 1. It's gonna be about 4 pages. I'm feeling good. Unlike the other day, man, I thought I was feeling good the other morning and damn fell asleep on the last sentence. The last sentence of the live. That sleep monster knocked me out. I was out of there. But we're gonna get it. You know, this chapter has 3 sections. And being that I've been trying to keep a steady pace, I really don't want to read. I want to read more than one section, but I'm not going to read more than one section unless the sections are really short. So we got about 4 pages. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 pages. We got about 4 pages. 4 pages. We'll get that in. We'll see how long it takes us. Lord willing, we can have a good flow tonight. Section 2 is 1, 2, 3, 4 pages as well. We'll come back another time. We'll see, man. We'll see. I really don't like to do long lives. At least not yet. But we'll see. I mean, if it's early enough, it's just a little after 10. I should have started at 9, but it's a little after 10 my time. So I think we can get this in about 30, 45 minutes. About 30, 45 minutes. We'll get section 1 in. And if it's, if I'm still up, feel like reading, we'll keep going. But for sure, section 1. So on the real side, the history of African American comedy from slavery to Chris Rock by Mr. Mel Watkins. Chapter 3, minstrelsy to vaudeville, black on black, section one. Section one. Let me make sure I got all my stuff ready to go. Yeah, we end up. Section one. Bam, bam, bam. It goes without saying that minstrels were disreputable lot in the eyes of a large section of the upper crust Negroes. But it is also true that all the best talent of that generation came down the same drain. Ooh-wee. I'm gonna bit my tongue. The composer, the singer, the musicians, the speaker, the stage performers, the minstrel show got them all. W.C. Handy. I say, Clem, what am I the reason that the people of the colored race smell so much louder than the whites? Why, the genus of music am so strongly developed in their whole system that their air comes out through all the pores. Anonymous minstrel show dialogue. This was the pungent flavoring to the national joke. It lay behind our uneasiness as it lay behind our benevolence. Aunt Jemima and Uncle Tom, our creations, at last had evaded us. They had a life, their own, perhaps a better life than ours, and they would never tell us what it was. Section 1. Despite their reputed natural ability at entertaining, few blacks emerged as professional performers before the Civil War. As slaves, of course, many had been required to perform for their master's amusement and profit. And there were scattered instances of freedom and slaves performing on the commercial stage before emancipation. The few who made the leap into professional show business, however, faced staunch resistance and most often overwhelming restrictions. Among the early non-comic entertainers was John Hewlett, 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 one of the original members of the African Company, the first notable Black American drama group. Performing before primarily Black audiences, this small, novice group managed to give performances of Shakespeare and other classics in Manhattan with a fair degree of regularity in the early 1820s. After the theater, located at Bleecker and Mercer Streets, closed because of harassment from white hoodlums, Hewlett immigrated to England and continued his acting career. In similar fashion, Ira Aldridge, perhaps the most critical acclaimed 19th century Black actor, reportedly began his acting career in New York City, then left for Europe, where a less biased reception allowed for greater freedom of expression. I'm gonna come back. Let me see some. I want to see something. Let's mark these names. Let's mark these names down. Ira Aldrich, John Hewlett. Let me see this Black History book. It's the Encyclopedia of African American Heritage by Susan Altman. So we'll see if how far it goes back. Maybe she has something on Ira Aldrich. Aldridge. Aldrich. Let's see. Let me see in the back. Maybe it's a glossary or something. An index. All right. Aldrich. She is in here. See if we can get a look at him. See who Ira Aldridge is. And let me see, John Hewlett. Let's see, page 10 for Aldrich. My Google. Hewlett. Hewlett's not in here, but let's see Aldrich. Ira Aldrich, page 10. Apollo Theater, huh? All right. Miss Aldrich. Or is it Mr.? I don't know. We'll see. It's only a paragraph. We'll read it. Ira Frederick Aldrich, which makes me think it's a man, from 1807 to 1867. Shakespearean actor, described by critics as among the greatest actors of his time. So it is a man. It is thought that Aldrich was born in New York City, where he attended the African Free School. He became interested in the theater while still in his teens and moved to England in 1824 to further his career. In 1833, he appeared at the Theatre Royal, Covent Garden in the role of Othello. He toured Europe in 1852 and was honored by the government of Haiti and by theatrical groups in Germany, Hungary, Switzerland, Russia, and other countries. He died while on tour in Poland. And that is the, what you call it, an insert from the Encyclopedia of African American Heritage by Susan Altman. I was hoping they was going to have a picture of old Ira, but they didn't. But I'm glad they was in there. All righty, let's get back to it. In similar fashion, Ira Aldrich, perhaps the most critically acclaimed 19th century Black actor, reportedly began his acting career. It was a he there if I paid attention. His acting career in New York City, then left for Europe, where a less biased reception allowed for greater freedom of expression. He became a celebrated tragic actor and performed in the most prestigious concert halls on the continent. The Shakespeare Theater at Stanford on Avon honored him with the Ira Aldrich Memorial Chair after his death in 1867. Black antebellum performers with aspirations to serious musical expression included the soprano Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield, admiringly called the Black Swan, who, like Hewlett and Aldrich, found her greatest success in Europe during the early 1850s, and Thomas Bowers, a tenor known as the Colored Mario, because he sounded like the Italian opera tenor Giovanni Mario. Then there was John Luca and his family, credited with inspiring the minstrel circle arrangement by Tom Fletcher, who, in addition to their minstrel performances, traveled throughout the northern United States in the mid-1800s, performing classical music for small audiences of cultivated Blacks. Thomas Green Bethune, Blind Tom, a young slave who demonstrated signs of being a musical prodigy as early as age 5, is the most noted and best known of these early musicians. He performed at concert halls throughout the United States as well as in Europe and South Africa from 1857 to the mid-1800s, and was recognized as a gifted concert pianist. But few antebellum Blacks were allowed exposure to the European classics, and even fewer were given the time, training, or opportunity to study or familiarize themselves with so-called high art. As burnt Ostendorf points out in Black literature in white America, by keeping blacks barred from middle class literature culture, whites forced them back upon the resources of their folk tradition. Despite its travesty and distortion, minstrelsy was a door that opened American popular culture to the influence and influx of Black American culture. A few Black entertainers had even established local reputations as popular songsters and clowns in a style that anticipated the minstrel tradition. In New Orleans, a street vendor and singer known as Signor Cornmealy or Old Cornmeal traveled about the area with a cart and horse, performing as his old Indian cornmeal. He sold Indian cornmeal. Excuse me. With his fine baritone voice, which he easily transformed into a ringing falsetto, he performed songs such as My Long Tail Blue and Old Resin the Bow, as well as his own tune, Fresh Cornmeal. I bet that was what they call that, a dandy to sell at, or what would they call that today? You know, like if you putting it on TV and you're trying to sell something. I bet it has something to do with selling that cornmeal he got, that old Indian cornmeal. His popularity was such that in 1837 he was asked to perform on the stage of New Orleans St. Charles Theater. Signor Cornmealy influenced the famed white minstrels George Nicholas and Thomas Jim Crow Rice, who, after seeing Cornmealy in 1837, added a skit called Cornmeal to his act, as well as another local Black entertainer, John Picayune Butler. Described as a French darky banjo player by one minstrel historian, Butler established a reputation as a musician and clown traveling through the Mississippi Valley region as early as the 1820s. By the 1850s, his banjo playing and odd ditties were known from New Orleans to Cincinnati. Neither Butler nor Cornmealy performed in blackface, but along with the raft of unknown slave performers of the era, they had tremendous influence on early white minstrels. A select few Black performers had even appeared with white minstrel troupes before the Civil War. The most famous was William Henry Juba Lane, who began performing in urban saloons as a teenager in the early 1840s, and by 1845 had appeared as a featured act with various minstrel troupes. In 1848, he traveled to England and performed as a member of the Ethiopian Serenaders. I don't know what this word is. As the sobriquet. I'm pretty sure it has something to do with some music. Sobriquet. 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 Let's see. Sobriquet. Trying to think of what it sounds like. Sobriquet. Sobriquet is in here. Epithet, a nickname. As the nickname Juba, as the epithet Juba, as the sobriquet Juba suggests. Lane was most acclaimed for his achievements in dance. The Juba, like the jig as performed by Black slaves, was a dance whose roots could be traced back to West Africa. Similar to African stick dances, in which sticks are slapped against dancers' bodies or against the ground to complement drums and heighten rhythmic accompaniment. accompaniment. The juba involved hand clapping, foot stomping, and slapping the hands against the body. While the juba is universally attributed to African sources, some confusion arises over the use of the term jig, not to be sure it in its pejorative, pejorative, not to be sure in its pejorative ethnic sense, but with reference to dance. Both white and black minstrels frequently presented some variation of jigs based on folk dances popular in England and Ireland. And in contemporary writings, the term seems to have been applied indiscriminately to a number of popular folk dances, including African secular dances and African American slave sacred ring shouts. Despite the confusion from 18th and 19th century reports of Europeans observing black dancers, it seems clear that the jig as danced by African slaves was quite distinct from English or Irish jigs. William Henry Lane combined European and African jigs with the juba to produce a dance form that was new to the minstrel stage. From available descriptions, it resembled a combination of what we now know as the hand jive and an early form of tap dance. Many authorities consider him the father of tap dancing. Whatever its exact components, Lane's dancing was a fresh and spectacular addition to the minstrel stage. Contrary to the claims of 19th century critics, it also quite probably represented the first appearance of authentic black dance on the American stage. Like the great John Bubbles of the dance comedy team Buck and Bubbles, who debuted about a century later, Lane was most praised for innovations in the manner in which he beats time with his feet. According to Robert C. Toll, he had learned a European dance, blended it with African tradition, and produced a new form. Lane's unique style, as well as the distinctly African-based rhythms of juba padding, were recognized and extolled by contemporary entertainment critics, as well as by such literary luminaries as Edgar Allan Poe, Mark Twain, and Charles Dickens. Indeed, Dickens called him the greatest dancer known. In the American Notes in 1842, Dickens describes Lane's performance: single shuffle, double shuffle, cut and cross cut, snapping his fingers, rolling his eyes, turning in his knees, presenting the backs of his legs in front, spinning about on his toes and heels like nothing but the man's fingers on the tambourine. All sorts of legs and no legs. What is this to him? At the height of his career in the late 1840s, Lane competed in a series of challenge dances with John Diamond. Oh man, set it off. You got served. Oh man, you got served. At the height of his career in the late 1840s, Lane competed in a series of challenge dances with John Diamond, the greatest white minstrel dancer of the time, and constantly won. Lane died in 1852 at the age of 27. Damn, he was young. But during his short career, he established himself as one of the minstrelsy's most talented and innovative performers. The only other black known to have performed with a white minstrel troupe before the war was Thomas Dilward, a dwarf said to have been about 2 or 3 feet tall, known as Japanese Tommy, apparently to obscure his African ancestry. Dilward was recognized as a talented dancer, singer, and musician. However, his size probably accounted for his appeal and access to the white minstrel stage. From 1835 to the late 1860s, he performed with numerous white troupes. By the end of his career, He was appearing with several of the growing number of black minstrel troops that had begun performing just before the Civil War. Lane and Dilward were among the first black performers to break into America's white entertainment world and probably deserve recognition as the first entertainers to present close approximations of real African American song, dance, or comedy on stage. Certainly, the impression made by Lane, or Master Juba, as he was sometimes called, indicates that, at least in dance, something new and distinctly African American had been added to the repertoire of blackface theatrics. It is doubtful whether either Lane or Dilward introduced any similarly significant elements of authentic African American song or comedy to the white troops with which they worked. While they had, while they may have brought some genuine nuances of movement and intonations, overall, they no doubt adhered to accepted minstrel routines. The long transformation of public black humor from the debased distortions of the early minstrels to anything resembling authentic private black humor did not begin in earnest until the appearance of all black minstrel troops. The first of those troops debuted around 1855. Most did not survive long, but as Toll points out, they understood that their principal appeal was their authenticity as black men. One group that toured in New York and Massachusetts, for instance, billed itself as 7 slaves just from Alabama, who are earning their freedom by giving concerts under the guidance of their northern friends. More black troops emerged during the Civil War, making appearances from New York to San Francisco, but none had real impact or staying power until Brooker and Clayton's Georgia Minstrel began touring in the Northeast around 1865. Not coincidentally, Charles Barney Hicks, destined to become one of the black minstrelsy's most energetic and creative proponents and performers, managed this troupe. The next year, perhaps spurred on by the success of Brooker, and Clayton's troops, Sam Hague, 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 a British minstrel dancer, took a company of black minstrels to England. This group, called Sam Hague's Slave Troupe of Georgia Minstrels, toured successfully for years and helped establish the legitimacy of black minstrel performers. In that same year, Charles Hicks organized his own troupe of black performers, also called Georgia Minstrels. Although this was a short-lived venture, his entry into the minstrel field as a black owner and operator was significant. Hicks was one of the few black owners who had any success competing with the larger, better-funded, white-owned companies. In the 1860s, a number of black-owned minstrel troupes surfaced, but by the mid-70s, most of these had either disappeared or been taken over by whites. Black minstrel groups were quickly becoming profitable business ventures, foreshadowing a trend that would characterize black entertainment until after the mid-1900s. Both the management and the profit derived from black stage acts were controlled by whites. Charles Callender, a white tavern owner, was among the first to realize the immense business potential of black minstrels. In 1872, when Sam Hague's Georgia Minstrels returned to America, he purchased the company and renamed it Callender's Georgia Minstrels. Among the performers were Charles Hicks and 2 of his most talented black comedians to emerge from minstrelsy, Bob Hite and Billy Cursans. Using promotional and advertising techniques similar to those employed for white troops by the minstrel entrepreneur J.H. Haverly, Callender quickly catapulted this troupe to the top of the heap, and for about 5 years, they reigned as the #1 black minstrel act in America. In fact, their popularity was such that Callender's name, along with Georgia and colored, became synonymous with black minstrelsy. In 1877, They were the lone black troupe listed among the leading American minstrel companies. In 1877, Haverly, perhaps the most flamboyant of the minstrel showmen, bought Georgia minstrels and immediately applied the same promotional hype that had kept his white companies ahead of their competitors. The size of the troupe was increased, and the shows were advertised as plantation extravaganzas. On Haverly's hands, the troupe emphasized the darky as he is at home, darky life in the cornfield, canebrake, barnyard, and on the levee and flatboat. Perhaps more significant, Haverly's colored minstrels strove for the spectacular. In a field near the Boston Theater in 1880, he built a replica of a southern plantation, which included overseers, bloodhounds, and darkies at work. More than 100 blacks were employed, supposedly presenting songs, dances, and peculiar to their people. In 1881, Haverly's immensely successful colored minstrels embarked on an extended European tour. In their absence, theatrical producers Gustave and Charles Frohman purchased the New Calendar Minstrel Company and set out to exceed Haverly in staging the spectacular. Keeping the extremely marketable Calendar name, the troupe was called Calendar's Consolidated Colored Minstrels. The Frohman's company presented even more lavish plantation fantasies, advertising themselves as the pick of the earth's colored talent. By 1882, this troupe was so successful that the Frohmans were able to purchase Haverly's minstrels and merge the two troupes. In so doing, they established a virtual monopoly. For the remainder of the decade, the Frohman's Calendar Company split into three separate groups, dominated the field of black minstrelsy. It proposed throughout the 1880s, and other white-owned troupes mimicked the Frohman brothers' approach, presenting extensively advertised, lavishly produced plantation extravaganzas while in the 1890s. Numerous other smaller black troupes also toured during this period, of course. Among them were white-owned companies such as Sprague and Blodgett's Georgia's Minstrels, W.S. Cleveland's Big Colored Minstrels, and Richard and Pringle's Minstrels. I wonder if that have anything to do with that, the chips, the Pringles chips. And despite their marginal success, a number of small black-owned companies toured. Lou Johnson organized his first company in the mid-1860s. Many contend that this was the first black minstrel troupe and was a manager and owner for nearly 3 decades. Some consider him the most successful black owner of the period. Although he played primarily in the western states, outside the more competitive big city markets, his troops reportedly had a dedicated following and headlined some of the most prominent black minstrel stars. In addition to Johnson's plantation minstrels, also billed as the Black Baby Boy Minstrels and Lou Johnson's original Tennessee Jubilee Singers, there were companies organized by minstrel performers such as Billy Kersans, Bob Hite, James Bland, and Ernest Hogan, the last a transition performer who starred in minstrel and vaudeville shows as well as musical comedies. Early in the 20th century, after minstrelsy had declined in the Northeast and in most urban areas, 2 other notable black-owned and managed troupes emerged. In 1900, William McCade organized the Georgia Troubadours. This traveling show toured the western states, primarily the Dakotas, Iowa, Michigan, and Minnesota, for about 10 years and was considered one of the best troupes of the time. Also, in 1900, Pat Chappell formed his Rabbit Foot Company, which was based in Florida, but traveled throughout the South, and according to the black entertainment expert Henry T. Sampson, was perhaps the best of the black-owned companies. After Chappelle's death in 1911, the troupe was sold to F.S. Wolcott, a white promoter. In addition to standard minstrel fare, the show featured future blues, and stage stars such as Ma Rainey, Ida Cox, Ethel Waters, Bessie Smith, and the comedy team of Butterbeans and Susie. Walcott's rabbit-foot minstrels traveled and performed into the middle of the century. Most interesting of the black owner-managers was Charles Hicks, himself a performer, whose name figured prominently in black minstrelsy from the outset, excuse me. Hicks, the original manager of Brooker and Clayton's Georgia Minstrels, had organized the troupe of his own as early as 1866. In 1870, he took a company to Germany, and when that venture failed, he starred in Sam Hague's integrated European troupe. When Charles Callender purchased the Hague troupe, Hicks was the business manager. Soon after, he again attempted to stage his own minstrel shows, briefly fielding the African minstrels and yet another Georgia minstrel troupe. In the early 1880s, he joined the black minstrel star A.D. Sawyer and Tom McIntosh in another attempt to organize black minstrel company. And when Billy Cursands formed his own company, Hicks was the manager. During his career as a performer, manager, and owner, he took black minstrel troupes to Canada, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and Java. Hicks died in Java in 1902, still pursuing the dream of establishing his own permanent minstrel company. By the end of the century, then, even as the minstrel craze neared its end, black performers had made the indelible mark on America's popular culture. Ironically, although the narrowly defined, primarily demeaning images of blacks that they commonly fostered were no different in most respects from those projected by white minstrels. As professional entertainers, they brought a small measure of dignity to themselves and therefore indirectly to other blacks. And that was section 1. Section 1 of chapter 2, which I read great. I think I read good. Shit. I like that pace. I didn't fumble over a lot of words, fumbled over some, but not a lot. Hey, let's keep going. I'm going to keep going. Section 2. Section 2. I'm feeling it. Since I'm feeling it, can you feel it? We'll get section 2 in. Get section 2. I don't mind keep going when I'm reading what I feel like I'm reading tonight. All right. Section 2. The most important consequence of black minstrelsy was that it provided a vehicle for the emergence of America's first professional black musical and comic artists. The Canny Negro writes, Ruby Blesh in They All Played Ragtime turned his version of the burnt cork divertisement into a subtle but devastating caricature of the white Ubermensch. Let's see what that is. The white Ubermensch. 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 It's probably not in this one. Ubermensch. Right here. Let's check the big one. Ubermensch. Let's see what an Ubermensch is. I think it's a name because it's capital. Come on, Uber. Let's see if I can find it in here. It's not in here either. Let's look it up. Let's look it up. Let me Google this shit. Ubermensch. Caricature, a devastating caricature of the white Ubermensch. 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 Ubermen. Ubermensch. Let's see how to pronounce it.
Ubermensch. Ubermensch.
I'll pronounce it right. Ubermensch. The ideal superior man of the future who could rise above conventional Christian morality to create and impose his own values, originally described by, I don't know, it's a German name, Nietzsche, and thus spake Zarathustra. Ubermensch. What is the concept of Ubermensch? Ubermensch is a being who is able to completely affirm life, someone who says yes to everything that comes their way, a being who is able to be their own demeanor of value, sculpt their characteristics and circumstances into a beautiful, empowered whole. Ubermensch. Ubermensch. The Canny Negro writes, Ruby Blesh in They All Played Ragtime turned his version of the burnt cork diversement. Fuck, let me look that shit up too. Excuse me. While I'm stumbling over this. Divertisement. Just write it down. Divertisement. Divertisement. I know I'm saying that wrong. Divertisement. Let's see what it is. Come on, sucker. Why you do me like that? I don't know why, baby. Diverti. Diver. TISSE. Divertisement. Divertisement. My bad. Divertisement. A minor entertainment or diversion. Divertisement. All right. He turned his version of the burnt cork divertisement into a subtle but devastating caricature of the white Ubermensch, employing the blackface like an African ceremonial mask, and through the whole thing insinuated his way onto the white stage. Although these men developed from the anonymity of blackface masks and ritualized performances, some were nevertheless able to establish themselves as unique talents among a host of lookalikes, homogenized entertainers. At the outset, some black minstrel troupes had used burnt cork makeup only for the inmen, and other performers wore none. As black minstrelsy grew and proposed, however, like their white counterparts, they began performing almost exclusively in blackface. The elaborate makeup and similarity in most minstrel entertainment fair no doubt contributed to the relative obscurity of these performers, whether white or black. Those few who did achieve star status usually had some outstanding talent that set them apart. The most acclaimed, depending on one's viewpoint, the most notorious black minstrel performer was the exuberant dancer and comedian Billy Cursands. Born around 1842, he began his career about the time of the Civil War and was an active performer until 2 years before his death in 1915. He performed with nearly every top minstrel group, his own as well as the Haverly, and Calendar troops. At the peak of his career, according to Tom Fletcher, he was so popular that in the South, a minstrel show without Billy Cursands was like a circus without elephants. He was the consummate minstrel performer in the traditional sense. Indeed, from all reports, he probably recreated the white minstrel's caricature as the slow-witted, slow-moving Sambo type with more gusto and authenticity than any other black minstrel. Cursan's greatest asset as a performer was his agility at acrobatics and dancing. Although he weighed more than 200 pounds, he was a stylish, innovative dancer. His showcase routines were the Virginia Essence or Essence of Old Virginia, a forerunner of the soft shoe, and the Buck and Wink. Some credit him with creating both dances. Certainly, Cursands was recognized as one of the era's masters performers. Hold on, let me look him up right quick. What is his name? Billy Cursands. Let me see where was I? So I could find my place again. Let's see if he's in the other book. Cursands. Let's see. The Encyclopedia of African American Heritage by Susan Altman. Let's see if he's in it. Cursands. Billy Cursands. If Ira's in here, Billy should be in here. But he's not. What a shame. Yeah, he's not. Billy Cursands. All right, back to it. He was influential in establishing the dances as shows business staples that are still performed in Broadway and Las Vegas shows as well as Hollywood musicals. I wonder what they are so I can have a visual. I would love to have a visual of what these dances actually are. Is it something I know? I wonder. Cursan's immense popularity, however, accrued primarily from his comedy routines. He was celebrated for his comic dances, drumming, and singing. Central to those routines were the facial contortions that highlighted his depiction of the ignorant coon character, which was his comic mainstay. He had an arresting physical anomaly, his exceedingly large mouth, which he exploited for all its comic value. While performing a light-footed, slick, soft shoe dance to a song like Stephen Foster's Swaney River, Cursands, to the audience's amazement, might fill his mouth with billiard balls without interrupting his dance. Or he might break into a song like Mary Gone with a Coon. The child that I bore should tink oh no more. The child that I bore should tink oh me no more. Then to run away with a big old black coon and emphasize the lyrics with outrageous distortions of his face and huge mouth. The slightest curl of his lip or opening of that yawning chasm termed his mouth was of itself sufficient to convulse the audience. One commenter remarked, W.C. Handy, described Curzans as a man who could make a mule laugh and insisted that he saw the comic put a coffee cup and saucer into his mouth. It was rumored that after a performance in London, Curzans quipped to Queen Victoria, "If God ever wanted my mouth any bigger, he would have to move my ears." Mocking or making light of some aspect of one's own anatomy, of course, is not unusual among comedians. Bob Hope's elongated, sloped nose serves as a constant source of one-liners in his stage act, and that late Marty Feldman used his saucer-like eyes as a central element in his comic repertoire. Comedians, after all, are clowns, and for a clown, physical abnormalities are just another means of eliciting a laugh. For Curzans, however, the rub was that the traits had exaggerated and burlesque were features that white minstrels had established as a central element in their caricature of blacks. Some blacks objected to Curzan's act, although, in general, he was more popular among blacks than with white audiences. Still, he was probably the first prominent black entertainer to confront a dilemma that would plague a succession of black show business people, especially comedians: the conflict between satirizing social images of blacks and contributing to whites' negative stereotypes of blacks in general. Ernest Hogan, Pig Meat Markham, Stephen Fetchin, Willie Best, Manton Moreland, nearly the entire cast of the Amos and Andy television show, and more recently, Richard Pryor, Eddie Murphy, and the TV variety show In Living Color have faced a similar dilemma. At the peak of his career, Curzans was the most sought after and popular black minstrel in America. He was also reportedly among the highest paid, his salary just below that of featured white minstrels. According to Tom Fletcher, when his name appeared on the billboards, the whole town would get ready for the show, taking on a holiday air. Apparently impervious to criticism from detractors, Curzans relished the popularity and success his own act brought him. Late in his career, in 1904, at the time when most top-billed black entertainers had successfully dropped the minstrel format and moved on to urban shows that had abandoned plantation themes, Curzans was asked to star in a black-produced show in the East. After a brief stint, he returned to minstrelsy, again formed his own troupe, and although he played some towns in the Northeast, resumed traveling through his beloved South, presenting traditional minstrel fare. When asked why he didn't leave minstrelsy and venture into vaudeville, Curzans responded simply, "All of my money came from the people of the South, the white and the colored, while playing down there. Whether they meant it or not, the way I was treated by them and still am, I feel at home. I also make a good living with no worries." James Bland was another outstanding performer whose talents lifted him above the obscurity of blackface minstrel ritual. Although known primarily as a songwriter, his popularity on stage was probably exceeded only by Curzans. Born of middle-class parents in 1854, Bland grew up in Flushing, New York. And when his father was given a federal political appointment during Reconstruction, Washington, D.C., Bland had tinkered with the banjo since childhood. But while studying arranging and composing at Howard University in 1874, he saw George Primrose, a well-known white minstrel, at the Ford Theater. Fascinated by minstrelsy and performing, Bland left Howard for the stage. Ain't that something? In little more than a year, he was managing and starring in his own minstrel troupe. By 1875, he had written In the Morning by the Bright Light and Carry Me Back to Old Virginia. And the next year, he starred in Sprague's Georgia Minstrels, a troupe that includes superstars Billy Curzan and Sam Lucas. In 1880, he joined Haverly's Colored Minstrels, where, With typical minstrel hyperbole, he was billed as the world's greatest minstrel man. He accompanied the Haverly Troupe on his European tour in 1881 and remained there when the troupe returned to America the following year. In Europe, Bland reached his peak as a performer. He starred in both his own troupe and companies managed by others. Well educated, handsome, a talented composer, singer, and comedian, Bland became something as a matinee idol in England and Germany, and is said to have earned as much as $10,000 a year. That boy would be a scrub today. I do wonder what the equivalent of that is today. 10,000 a year, then what is it today? That's what I wonder. What year is it? This is 1881. In 1881, what is 10,000 a year in 1881? Would that be like a millionaire? I wonder. By 1890, he was back in America. As his career waned during the decade, he performed with W.C. Cleveland's Colored Minstrel Carnival, as well as with other all-black troupes. Bland died in 1911 and was buried in an anonymous pauper's grave in a black cemetery near Philadelphia. Damn, what a shame. Bland's songwriting talent and singing so overshadowed his comic abilities that there are few remaining references to the latter. It seems apparent, however, that his comic demeanor was more low-key than that of Billy Carson's or Curson's. Tom Fletcher, his contemporary, recalled the Bland was a comedian as well as a composer. When he walked on stage to do his specialty, no one knew just what he was going to say. He followed no set routine and could convulse an audience with his handling of whatever crossed his mind. Others refers to him as a refined comedian. One can only surmise that Bland's education and desire to be recognized as a serious composer and idol led him to avoid most of the blatant coon antics. Still, Bland remains a controversial figure in Black entertainment history. He wrote as many as 700 songs during his lifetime and was known among his peers as the Black Stephen Foster. At the time, it was common practice for writers to sell songs outright to publishing companies and other entertainers. Consequently, many of his songs were attributed to other composers. Although the music historian Elaine Southern contends that Bland's unpretentious sentimental songs were lightly syncopated. I don't know what that word is. Let's see what it is. Syncopated. 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 A music or a rhythm characterized by displaced beats or accents so that the strong beats are weak and vice versa. The melodic bass lines and syncopated rhythms of funk. Syncopated. Although the musician historian Elaine Southern, contends that Bland's unpretentious, sentimental songs were lightly syncopated and reflected the influence of the folk songs he heard sung by ex-slaves in Washington, D.C. Many musicologists argue that Bland's music reflects little or no influence from genuine black folk songs. Generally, their form and content are indistinguishable from the raft of degrading, stereotype written minstrel songs that were turned out by white composers. The familiar Carry Me Back to Old Virginia, which was adopted as Virginia's official state song in 1940s. I wonder if it's still that. I wonder if it's still that. What is Virginia's official state song?
According to YouTube, by a vote of 39-0 in the Virginia State Senate, Our Great Virginia was designated the official state traditional song, and Sweet Virginia Breeze was designated the official state popular song of Virginia.
What was the name of the song? Let's see. Carry Me Back to Old Virginia, I guess. That's a 2015, so it might have changed. I guess they changed it. The familiar Carry Me Back to Old Virginia, which was adopted as Virginia's official state song in 1940, for instance, is a paean to the mythical antebellum South, where Massa and Missus awaited their loyal servant, and even after their debts, the old darkey's heart am long to go. In the evening, by the moonlight, reiterates the theme of darkies hoping to be reunited with Massa and Missus since everything it was done so merry, gay, and bright. Ironically, Bland, like many composers in this genre of songs, had never witnessed or experienced the reality of slavery. Tom Fletcher, along with Elaine Southern, suggests that Bland absorbed his knowledge of slavery from ex-slaves who lived and worked in Washington after emancipation. But more likely, Bland was mimicking the sentiments and working within a musical form that was inspired primarily by the mythology of the minstrel stage, not, as Fletcher suggests, but the beautiful melodies of his own people. As the musicologist Sam Dennison aptly puts it, what is undisputable is Bland's genius in imitating white song types. And he did so with amazing regularity and consistency. Among the hundreds of minstrel and parlor tunes he composed are favorites such as In the Morning by the Bright Light, Listen to the Silver Trumpet, and Oh Dem Golden Slippers. The demeaning character of his songs aside, Bland was the most prolific and famous black composer of the minstrel period, as well as one of its most successful and influential performers. Still, his education and ambition suggest that his quest for recognition and stardom accounts for the character of his work. To the great extent, the music industry itself dictated the type of songs that would be published. Faced with the dilemma of succeeding personally at the expense of publicly denigrating blacks or not being published at all, he opted for success. Ultimately, the choice cost him in ways he perhaps had not foreseen. Bland's career seems to have caused him of the same inner turmoil that years later would plague the black vaudeville comedian Bert Williams, who is recognized by many of America's first comedy star as America's first comedy star. Bland's composition had become minstrel staples, but many whites were unaware that he or any other black man had written them. And although he was idolized in Europe, he was restricted to performing with all black troops in the United States. Then, in the late 1890s, when work in minstrel shows declined the most, black minstrels turned to black produced shows with urban settings. Bland was left out. He was too closely associated with the plantation themes of traditional minstrelsy. Racism had both restricted his opportunities and denied him the recognition he thought he deserved. Toward the end, both his life and his career seemed to have fallen apart, and he apparently turned to alcohol. Ubi Blank, reminiscing about the meeting in Atlantic City during the early 1900s with Bland, left him holding the check, suggesting that despair played a key role in Bland's death. I never saw him again, Blake said, but I guess he didn't live long after that. Poor Jimmy was another drinking man. I guess that's why he was so unreliable. When he died, penniless, in Philadelphia, authorities did not know who Bland was or what he had accomplished. The circumstances of his death stand as a melancholy footnote to the career of America's first successful Black popular songwriter. Although not as popular as Curzons in America or Bland in Europe, Sam Lucas still looms as one of the most beloved and respected Black minstrel performers. He was, in fact, a transitional figure between minstrelsy and the more glamorous, lavishly produced shows with urban settings that ushered in an era of Black show business at the turn of the century. Moreover, as an entertainer, Lucas was celebrated for his comic and dramatic roles, as well as his performances on the minstrel stage, the Broadway stage, and at the very end of his career in motion pictures. I'm gonna have to go look him up. Sam Lucas. Sam Lucas. That name sounds so familiar. Sam Lucas. Let's see if he's in the other book too. I'm gonna put that where I was. I might have to keep that book close. Sam Lucas. Maybe they have a picture of him. Mr. Lucas. Let's see. Mr. Lucas. Man, he's not in here. It's a shame. His impact on Black entertainment was such that James Weldon Johnson, a civil rights leader as well as dramatist, songwriter, poet, and novelist, called him the grand old man of the Negro stage. Lucas was born in Ohio of free parents in 1850. He began singing and playing the guitar as a teenager while working as a barber. He established a local reputation as a performer. After the Civil War, when Black minstrel troupes gained in popularity, he joined a few of the traveling Black companies and played and sang on boats on the Ohio River. Eventually, colored shows began to catch on with the public. He told Tom Fletcher, by that time, I had built myself up to the point where I was one of the best all-around entertainers in the business, and I could pick my own show. Subsequently, he starred with most of the successful Black minstrel companies as a comedian and singer. But Lucas was not content with such limited roles, and throughout his career, he attempted to establish himself as a serious actor. He had short stints in dramatic roles with the Hyers Sisters, a refined operatic and dramatic company that presented serious plays based on Black history as well as musical comedies during the 1870s. And when the Froman brothers staged a serious production of Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1878, Lucas became the first Black man to play the leading role. After the touring play closed, however, there were few opportunities for dramatic expression, and Lucas returned to minstrelsy. In 1890, he took the part of an Inman in Sam T. Jack's The Creole Show. The production that most historians credit with being the first Black show to abandon the straight minstrel format. Although the Creole show maintained an overall minstrel structure, it introduced a chorus line of 16 female dancers and foreshadowed productions like the Octoroons and Oriental America, variety shows that debuted in 1895 and further departed from the minstrel tradition. Lewis met his wife during his stint with the Creole show. Afterward, they traveled throughout the country, appearing at museums, variety houses, and vaudeville theaters. Then, in 1898, Lucas went to Boston, where he joined Bob Cole's A Trip to Coontown, a production that set several precedents. It was the first show to be written, directed, and produced by blacks, as well as the first black show to make a complete break with minstrel tradition. Lucas's career was capped in 1915 when he became the first black man to star in a film version of Uncle Tom's Cabin. Shortly afterward, on January 15, 1916, he died of an illness contracted during production of that film. Lucas made many significant strides and was associated with several milestone productions during his career. Yet, like most black entertainers of the period, he was forced to return repeatedly to stereotypical minstrel roles in order to support himself. He had neither the comic talent as Billy Kersands nor the songwriting ability of James Bland. But throughout his career, he balanced his buffoonish role as minstrel comic with serious roles in which blacks were depicted with dignity. Unlike Bland, Lucas occasionally successfully inserted lyrics that countered some of the prevailing stage images of blacks, particularly concerning slaves, supposed nostalgia of the comfort and safety of their former masters' plantations. His My Dear Old Southern Home proclaimed, "But bless the Lord, the good times come. I was freed by those northern men. And in the day I was sought free, Lucas joyously celebrates emancipation." Lucas's act also regularly includes songs by other composers, such as C.A. White's Old Uncle Jasper, which delayed the romanticized image of the helpless darky hopelessly connected to the old plantation. And Emancipation Day, I have lived to see that too. The happiest day the colored man ever knew. Bob Hite was another standout black minstrel. By the 1870s, he had established himself as a star with Charles Hicks and Sam Hayes' integrated slave troupe of Georgia minstrels in England. In 1872, when Hayes' troops returned to America and was bought by Charles Callender, Hite, a proud man whose talents as a comedian were later compared to those of the great Burt Williams, along with Hicks, Kersands, and others, demanded more money and recognition. Their demands were ignored, so they quit and tried to start their own troupe, a move that prompted considerable controversy and racial tension, particularly after Callender asserted that they had been stolen from him. Their newly founded black troupe failed, however, and most of the performers returned to Callender's company. But Hite, despite the general assumption that he was destined for stardom, refused to rejoin. He immigrated to Europe and performed there for years. Other prominent black minstrel performers included Tom McIntosh, who, along with Charles Hicks and A.D. Sawyer, organized several all-black troupes and was said to rival Billy Kersands at low comedy, particularly mugging and outrageous facial distortions. Horace Weston established his reputation as an extraordinary dancer and, according to some historians, ranked with Juba Lane as one of the most innovative early black dancers. Tom Fletcher began in minstrelsy as a teenager in 1888, and in addition to performing on stage until the mid 1900s, was among the first black performers to appear in motion pictures. He was also the author of 100 Years of the Negro in Show Business, which remain an indispensable first-hand guide to the early development of the black entertainment in America. Billy McLean debuted as a minstrel performer at age 17 with Lou Johnson's Minstrels in 1883. Considered one of the most talented and versatile performers on the American stage, he worked with the numerous minstrel troupes, among with Blight's Georgia's Minstrels, Cleveland's Minstrels, and Callender's Minstrels, before establishing himself as a performer, writer, and producer in the early 20th century. Black shows and vaudeville. He reduced sensational reviews for his performance with Ernest Hogan during the Afro-American Minstrel Company's tour of Australia and Honolulu. The Pacific commercial advertiser of Honolulu commented, "McLean is an actor. He is not only a dancer, the best Negro minstrel that has been here in years, but in fact he has made some strides along the way, and his poise, his quiet demeanor, and his command of a situation show real dramatic instinct." Later, with Hogan, McLean wrote and organized the original Smart Set Company, one of the most successful black road shows produced in the earlier 20th century. He also claimed that he introduced the cakewalk, an 1890s dance fad, to the American stage. Ernest Hogan, best known for the song "All Coons Look Alike to Me" in 1896, and for his vaudeville appearances as a comedian, also began his career in minstrelsy. He joined Pringle's Georgia Minstrel as a teenager, starred in Black Patty's Troubadours in the mid-1890s and in 1899, after a successful stint as a headliner at Hammerstein's Victoria in New York City, was featured with the Afro-American minstrels as the unbleached American. Hogan created the character George Washington Bullion for Smart Set and was immediately acclaimed as an exponential comedian. His comic talent, similar to but slightly more refined than that of Cursan's and McIntosh, was also featured in the 1905 production of Rufus Rastus. He died in 1909 while working on the new production, The Oyster Man. These early performers were the stars of black minstrelsy, and at the time when almost no blacks were allowed access to high-paying or highly esteemed occupations, they carved a niche for themselves in the world of popular entertainment. Although few of them were able to introduce much of their own authentic folk heritage into the stilted presentation of the minstrel Negro, they did manage to open doors for the scores of black performers who followed. Some, outlasting minstrelsy, went on to lead efforts to eliminate the minstrel image. Despite their achievements, they have been vigorously attacked by observers. I thought it said overseers. By observers who justifiably criticize their active part in helping to reinforce black Sambo and coon stereotypes. But serious questions remain about the charge that they were ever anything more to blacks than theatrical caricatures. And that is the end of section 2 of chapter 3, Black Minstrelsy to Vaudeville, Black on Black. And on the real side, a history of African American comedy from slavery to Chris Rock by Mel Watkins. I was reading so good to myself, I had to keep going. Shit, I kind of want to keep going and read section 3. It's only 3 sections, and let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. No, I ain't gonna do it. Section 3 gonna be its own thing. his own live. Section 3 will be his own live. But so far, so good, man. There's a lot of names. There was a lot of names that I definitely didn't know. That's why I had to try to look them up in that the Encyclopedia of African American Heritage, and I wish it had, Lucas and Cursans in there. I wish they had pictures of them so I could, pull it up. But man, it's a lot of singing and dancing and shucking and jiving right here, boy. But they say that laughter is the best way to get over traumatic experiences or traumatic situations. People laugh so they don't have to cry. My mama used to get on me all the time. She'd be like, everything not funny. It's not my fault. I could find something funny in everything, But hey, the brothers persevered one day at a time, one situation at a time. Some of them didn't have shit in the end. Like Bland. Bland didn't have nothing. To be buried in a pauper's grave, a no-name pauper's grave. You might have a railroad or a street over this man's grave right now, and nobody even knows. That's not the way I would like to go. That's not the way I want to go. But definitely a good read tonight. Definitely a little good read. I hope that it was definitely easier to follow for others. But we're going to keep pushing in this big old book. Look at that big old thing, man. But look at this. Look at that. Look at that, boy. Ooh. Man, we moving it. One page at a time, one section at a time, one chapter at a time, one day at a time, until we finish the whole thing. Until we finish the whole thing and mark it down for the next one. On the Real Side by Mel Watkins. So far it's not as funny as I thought it would be. Very historical. A lot of history and dates, names and dates, like I would be in history class. It's a couple of little, funny things that may not be put in there to be funny, but I find them funny. But I really thought that it would be funnier than what it is so far, and maybe I just haven't hit the good stuff yet. Which is still the beginning of the book. We're only in chapter 3. We're in chapter 3. Let me see. Yeah, we're only in chapter 3. It's still the beginning of the book. A lot of it's been read, but it's still the beginning of the book. So maybe the stuff that I thought I would see will come a little later, and I'm gonna keep reading to find out. Because I sure want to know. But till next time, man. I hope y'all enjoyed it. For all those that catch it on the back end, like, comment, subscribe, leave a message. Say something. What you think? Is there anything that you have learned or that you can use to learn and grow from? Anything that you didn't know before? Because there's a lot of stuff that I didn't know, considering the minstrelsy, as they called it, or the troops in the last chapter. In chapter 2, I didn't know that blackface was performed in the White House. So, that's something new to me. That's something, that have me looking at the White House with the side eye. Yeah. With the side eye. But, hey, it was good. So, till next time, shalom, everybody. Shalom, shalom, shalom. I hope you have a nice night, nice day, nice evening. And we'll be back next time with the next session of Reading with SHILO. SHILO out.